This is the PDF included in Nancy's Cosmic Rainbow pattern. Place the PDF on your copier. Put a sheet of English paper piecing made modern self-stick templates in your paper tray. You want the PDF to print to the paper side of the template sheet, then press print. You just created a sheet of self-stick templates. It's fine, some of the shapes are in the logo area. You want to check and make sure your scale equals 1 inch so you know your shapes are coming out the correct size. Now let's cut the templates out. I use a regular quilt roller and a rotary cutter to make most of the cuts. Carefully line up the outside of the black line and cut. I'm looking for all the straight lines that I can cut without cutting into another shape. I am showing you multiple cuts so you know how to work around the shape. I wanted to add music here for your enjoyment, but that seems to be above my editing skills for right now. You see me thinking about what I want to cut next. If I am in a tight spot, I will choose to use scissors to make those cuts. Then I can return to using the ruler once I have more space not to cut into another shape. If I cut the side of shape C, my rotary blade will extend into the other shape C, so back to the scissors. Now you can feel confident to cut your templates, having seen how the cuts are made. Nancy's pattern features solid colors. These blocks show options for focused or fussy cutting fabric. There are 4 shapes. Let's look at selecting fabrics for those shapes. You can fold the templates to find the center, which makes it easier to line up with your motif. Fold to the paper side, not the sticky side. Shape A is the focus of the block. Choose a motif that fills up that space. Determine where to place the template. You need to be able to trim a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is how folding the template can help you line up with the center of the motif. Templates can be used on the right or wrong side of the fabric. Here the template is on the wrong side of the fabric. In the beginning, I placed the templates on the right side of the fabric, trimmed the seam allowance, and then moved and centered the template on the wrong side for sewing. One day I realized if I placed the template on the wrong side of the fabric, trimmed the seam allowance, the template was in position for sewing. Step saved. I will admit sometimes it's easier for my brain to work from the right side of the fabric. It works either way. Here is shape A trimmed out. Somehow I forgot to hit record. Stay with me. You will see how the shapes get trimmed out. This is shape B. It needs to be on the wrong side of the fabric for this pattern. I trimmed out shape B and am making the second of 6 cuts for this shape. Here is how to trim out the shapes. An outer quarter roller butts up against the template and gives you a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. Here you can see the second cut of shape B. I am pattern matching all of shape B's. You can see how easy it is to match and repeat the cut. All 6 shape B's are cut out. I have left the template on the first cut and pattern matched to cut the remaining 5. Make sure there's enough fabric to cut out the number of shapes you need. I wanted to use this green stripe but realized there was not enough to get 6 cuts. Here is an insight about choosing which fabrics to use. This green stripe has multiple greens that blend well with the focus fabric. The other green did not match as well and the pattern was a bit busy. You can use templates to cut multiple layers of fabric. Shape C is symmetrical, so whether you cut it from the right or wrong side of the fabric, it does not matter. I am folding with enough space to cut the seam allowance. I am paying attention to keeping the stripe in line so all the cuts are in the same direction. This piece of fabric was only long enough to fold 5 times. I will need to cut 1 more shape C. I will show you that in a minute. Here is a stack. Having a sharp blade is helpful. Multiple cuts are easy because the template does not slide around. Keep your fabric aligned and cut like you would a single shape. I'm going to cut all sides so you can see the entire process. The top side is where the folds are. As long as you've allowed for the 1/4 inch seam allowance, you'll be fine. Cutting off the points will help you align the shapes to sew. Here is the stack cut. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's cut the last of shape C. It is a little hard to find the match with just the seam allowance showing. Let's use one of the shapes without the template to make it easier to find a match. I am not finding the match. Then watch what happens. There it is, hiding in plain sight. Now that you know where it is, you can line up the shape with the template on it to cut the 6th shape. There is no need to use a new template. You can reuse the one you've already cut until it's time to stitch that shape in place. You get a longer life from your templates and save time not having to line up a new template. These little yellow flowers fit perfectly. The V of the D will be pointing to the center of the block. Paying attention to the direction of the shape in the block will help avoid disappointment when you start piecing. I should have mentioned this earlier. You need to remove the paper backing from the templates. Most of them come with a place to fold and lift the paper off. If you don't see that, you can use a fine straight pin to separate the paper. Like before, I'm going to fold the template to help center it on the flowers. It makes it much easier to place the template exactly where you want it. Once the template is in place, you can hold it up against the light or use a light box to check you are happy with the placement. It is hard for you to see because of my overhead lights. Let's trim out shape D. Trimming off the points helps with alignment when piecing. Here is a view of finding the next cut. If you go to the motif right beside the one you just cut, the right side does not have enough room. So we are going to skip that motif and move to every other one. Focus cutting is not an economical way to use fabric, but the results are stunning. Let's lay out the block to see what the end result will look like. Now is the time to make changes if you don't like something. The small scale pink checks set off the center of the motif. The green fabric gives motion to the block. The small flower motif repeats the scale of the pink check and complements the colors. Now we get to sew. The template is on the wrong side of the center motif. Remove the template from shape B. You only need the template on shape A. Line up shape B. This is where cutting the points off help line up the shapes for sewing. Flip over because you want to stitch along the edge of the template from corner to corner, tacking at the beginning and the end. Set your needle down at the corner of the template. Stitch along the edge of the template, not through it. Stop at the edge of the template and tack, otherwise known as a backstitch. I trim threads to keep everything nice and tidy. We are adding the second shape B. See how the 1/4 inch seam allowance lays over the first shape B? Keep watching for a better view. Start again at the corner of the template and stitch to the end of the template, not through your seam allowances, and tack at the end. Here is the view of the 1/4 inch seam allowance not stitched through. You can see how I am lining up shape B to stitch. Here is an underneath view. That edge of shape B is lining up with the edge of the hexagon on top. We are stitching right up to but not into the other shape B. Here is a good view of what that looks like. This is a view from the right side. Another view of lining up shape B. The purple thing scoops your seam allowances out of the way so you are not stitching through them. Whoops, I am stitching on the wrong side. You need to see your template so you are not stitching through it. Here is a good view of the 1/4 inch portion being lined up. All 6 of shape B's have been sewn in. Carefully remove template A. Now we are going to connect the remaining part of shape B to each other. Put your needle down 1/4 inch from the end of the shape and stitch. This stitching does not require a template. Use your 1/4 inch foot as your guide. Stop when you come to the previous stitching. Remember to tack at the beginning and the end. Again, line up the unsewn part of shape B, making sure everything is laying flat. Flip your project over and stitch from the end to the previous stitching. It makes it easier to keep the seam allowances from being sewn down, and tack at the end. Continue stitching until all shape B's are connected. Here is the end result. A note about pressing. Press the seams in the direction that creates the flattest lay. This quilter's clapper is a handy tool to encourage the seams to lay flat. Now we are going to add shape C to the block. I cut with template C on the right side of the fabric, so I need to reposition it to the wrong side to stitch. Center the shape C template on the wrong side of your cut fabric. This is how shape C will be stitched in. Bend back the seam allowances to see where it butts up against the previous seams. Align the edges, right sides together, and you are ready to stitch. Make sure your seam allowances are out of the way and not being stitched through. Another check to see if you are in position. The point of the template C is butting up to the previous seam, right where it needs to be. I am scooping the seam allowances out of the way with a tool called the purple fang. Ready to stitch. Check the seam allowances at the end are folded out of the way. Stitch along the template, not through it. Make sure shape C is lined up at the end and the seam allowances are out of the way. Stitch to the point of the template and tack. The first of 6 shape C's is done. Remove the template and center it on another shape C fabric cut. Add another shape C, making sure the seam allowances are out of the way. Seeing this again helps you remember what we did to line this shape up. Get it in position to stitch and check your seam allowances at the end. This is how the stitching meets without sewing through the seam allowances. Remove the template, they are reusable, and center it on another shape C fabric cut. Repeat the process to add another shape C. Here is a tip. You can fold the templates paper side to paper side to help center the template on the fabric cut. Fold the fabric cut and match up the folds. Now we are going to add shape D. This is the easiest one to line up and stitch. Remove the template from the last shape C you stitched. You only need a template on one shape. Shape D was cut with the template on the wrong side of the fabric, so it's ready to go. Folding the fabric and the template will help you line it up right where it needs to go. I find it helpful to look at the shape's position right side up to know it is being added correctly. The fold allows you to line it up to the previous stitch shapes. It is in position. Make sure the underneath seam allowances are out of the way and stitch. Stitch to the corner point and tack. Because you have not sewn the seam allowances, you are able to freely flip the shape into another position. Always make sure the seam allowances are out of the way so you are not stitching them down. It is easiest to start at the end and stitch towards the other seams. Making sure your seam allowances are out of the way, stop at the end of the template and tack. Here are the results. A perfectly matched point. Remove the template. Center it on another shape D fabric cut, folding if it helps you center it. This is an excellent view of what your stitching looks like. See how easy it is to flip sections when you have not sewn through the seam allowances. Line up and stitch again. Sometimes you need to stitch from the center out, and that is fine. Make sure your seam allowances are out of the way. Here's what the block looks like pieced. Continue to follow Nancy's pattern directions to put your blocks together.